Once upon a time, before kingdoms rose and cities filled with noise, there was a girl named Dinah, the daughter of Jacob and Leah. This isn't just a story about what happened to her. It's a story about being seen, being hurt, and still being held by a God who never forgets your name. Because even when people don't listen to your voice, God always does. The first sign was silence, not the peaceful kind, but the kind that stands too still, like the air knows what's coming before anyone else does. Even the sheep were quiet that morning. Even the fire forgot how to crackle. Jacob's camp, usually filled with the noise of sons shouting, servants calling, animals crying, had gone soft around the edges. It was the kind of quiet that made the hairs on the back of your neck rise. And in the middle of it all, near the edge of the tents, stood Dinah. She wasn't a child anymore, not quite grown, not quite free. The only daughter of Jacob. The only girl in a family that had no idea what to do with her softness, her questions, her need to be seen. She had spent her whole life walking behind 12 brothers, 12 loud, reckless, important brothers, each one carrying their own destiny like it was heavier than hers. But Dinah had something they didn't. She noticed things. The way her mother's hands trembled after speaking with Rachel. The way Jacob prayed a little longer whenever the family stopped near a foreign land. And lately, the way the city of Shechem shimmered in the distance just over the hill, too close to ignore. That morning, the city's towers were glowing gold in the sunrise. Women with painted hands walked the outer roads. Their bracelets clicked like wind chimes. Their laughter floated down into the valley where the camp lay hidden. Dinah watched them every day, how free they seemed. How untouched by her family's strange legacy of tents, altars, promises, and curses. She didn't tell anyone where she was going. Not her mother Leah, who barely smiled anymore. Not Judah or Levi, who guarded her like she was sacred and breakable all at once. Dinah just walked, past the goats, past the fire, into the long grass that bent low as if trying to warn her. No one stopped her, not even the wind. Shechem was louder up close. Spices smoked from clay jars, perfumed oil shimmered in the sun. Girls her age traded cloth, whispered stories, passed coins from hand to hand. Dinah didn't speak, she just moved quietly among them, unseen and untethered, until a voice behind her made her pause. "You're not from here." She turned. A man stood in the shade of the gate, tall, young, wrapped in fine linen. His arms were crossed, but his eyes studied her like she was already his. "What's your name?" he asked. Dinah said nothing. Not at first. He smiled anyway. "I'm Shechem. The city is named after me." She answered finally. "Dinah." A pause, a shift in the air. He nodded slowly, almost like a promise. "That's a name worth remembering." And just like that, the world tilted. Just a little. Just enough for the story to begin, because sometimes the danger doesn't come like a roar. Sometimes it walks like a prince and speaks like a friend. He led her through the gate like she belonged there, and for a moment, she let herself believe it. Shechem didn't grab her hand. He didn't rush. He just walked ahead, glancing back, a flicker of a grin tugging at his lips like this had already happened before and was happening again. They passed pillars, carved with stories she didn't understand. Water jugs lined the walls. A woman poured oil into a basin and looked up, surprised to see Dinah. But she didn't speak. No one did. Because the prince was with her. And in Shechem, that meant something. They reached a garden walled in stone. Taller trees shaded the center, where a fountain hummed beneath low-hanging vines. A servant appeared with fruit on a silver dish, figs, pomegranates, slices of golden melon. Dinah didn't take any. Shechem waved the servant away with one hand, never taking his eyes off her. "I like quiet places," he said. Dinah nodded. The camp was never quiet. Not really. There was always a brother shouting, a sheep crying, a fire snapping too loud. But this was still. Still like the moment before a storm. "Why did you come?" he asked. She blinked. "Come where?" "To the city." His voice was soft, but not gentle. The kind of softness that draws you closer without asking. Dinah hesitated. "I wanted to see the women." A beat passed. "Do you think they're beautiful?" Dinah looked away. "I think they're free." Shechem stepped closer. "You could be too." She shifted her weight. Something in his tone. It brushed against her like fingers tracing a line in sand. "I should go," she said quietly. His expression didn't change. Not exactly, just settled. Like he already expected her to say that. "Let me walk you back," he offered. She shook her head. It's not far." A pause. Then he said her name again. Slower this time. "Dinah!" It lingered in the air. She turned, walked away, didn't run, didn't speak, just walked. But the garden door didn't shut behind her, and Shechem didn't stay where she left him. He watched and waited. Because something in his gaze said this: what walks away can always be brought back. Back in the valley, the wind picked up. The goat stirred again. A raven landed on a crooked branch. And somewhere beneath Jacob's tent, Leah prayed. Not for a husband, not for her sons, but for her daughter. The one no one had noticed had gone missing until it was too late. She went back. Not the next day, not with excitement, but slowly and on purpose. The garden stayed in her mind like perfume trapped in fabric. The sound of the fountain, the taste of silence, the way Shechem had said her name, not as a command, but as if he had found something he wanted to keep. No one in her camp had noticed she was gone that first time. No one asked. No one followed. And that silence gave her room to wonder, what if there was more than her brother's noise? What if someone finally saw her for herself? So she walked again. Over the same grass that bent lower this time, like it knew. Through the same gate, now open wider, and into the same city that had already begun to reshape her name. This time, Shechem was waiting. Not by accident, not with surprise. He stood on the steps of a house carved from pale stone, his robe dark blue, his arms behind his back. "Dinah," he said. She nodded, cautious. "I didn't plan to come." "But you did." A pause. Then he turned and motioned toward the doorway. "Come in." The servants bowed when they saw her. One laid out a cloth for her to sit. Another brought honey-dipped dates. Another lit a slow-burning candle in a clay jar that smelled like cedar and crushed rose. Dinah sat, tense. "It's quiet here," she said. Shechem poured wine into a cup, then handed it to her. "It's a home, not a camp." She didn't drink, but she didn't leave either. He watched her with the same stillness he always had, measured, software, but unblinking. "You don't belong in the desert," he said again. "You belong in something built, something permanent." She shook her head. "My family follows God. We go where He leads." And do you ever get to choose where you go? The question sat heavy between them. She didn't answer. Not because she couldn't, but because part of her didn't know anymore. Then he stood, walked closer. Not threatening, not loud, but too close. And this time, when he reached for her hand, she didn't pull away fast enough. "I've waited for someone like you," he whispered. "Why?" "Because you don't know how rare you are." The words should have sounded sweet. Instead, they echoed. And in the back of her heart, a small voice tried to rise, a warning, a pulling. But it was buried beneath layers of being seen, touched, wanted. So she stayed. Just a little longer, long enough for the house to feel like a cage dressed in silk. That evening, when she returned to camp, her scarf was crooked. Her hands trembled when she washed them. No one noticed. Not Reuben, not Leah, not even Jacob, but heaven saw. And the ground beneath Shechem city had already begun to crack. Shechem's house was quiet. Too quiet. The kind that wraps around you like velvet, soft but suffocating. This time, when Dinah entered, the servants were gone. The fruit was already peeled. The wine already poured. The door already shut. She stood near the wall, unsure. Shechem was seated, his gaze heavier than usual, still smiling, but there was no wonder in it now, just certainty, like he already believed she belonged to him. "Sit," he said, tapping the cushion beside him. Dinah stayed where she was. "I shouldn't have come," she whispered. "You did." His voice was calm, too calm. She took a step back. "Something's different today." "You're right," he said, standing slowly. "I've waited long enough." The air shifted. The room, once gold and glowing, felt colder now, like the sun had moved behind something unseen. Dinah turned to leave, but Shechem stepped in front of her, still smiling, still smooth. But now, something deeper had surfaced, something that didn't ask for permission, something that no longer pretended. "I honored you," he said. "You wanted me here," she answered, trying to keep her voice steady. "But not just here," he replied, stepping closer. "I wanted you with me, as mine. I never said yes. You didn't have to." The words broke like a bone inside her. And in that moment, something holy, the right to choose, the right to be safe, was taken. Not with violence that shouted, but with silence that pressed down and held. Afterward, the house was still again. But the stillness wasn't beautiful anymore. It was hollow. Like the walls knew, like the floor had witnessed something it could never forget. Dinah sat in the corner of the room, legs pulled to her chest, scarf hanging loose over her shoulder. Shechem paced near the doorway, eyes troubled but proud, as if he had conquered something, as if love and ownership were the same. "I'll speak to my father," he said at last. "We'll make it official. You'll be mine, forever." But Dinah didn't answer. She was already somewhere else, somewhere deeper, somewhere broken. She had entered the city with questions in her heart, and now she had no voice to ask them. Back in the camp, Judah asked where she'd gone. Leah folded the same cloth 4 times in silence. And Jacob looked at the horizon, the city glowing red beneath the evening sun. A storm was gathering, but no one could see it yet. No one except heaven. And soon, 12 sons would learn what happens when a sister's silence is shattered. The sun rose too fast the next morning. Dinah didn't see it. She sat behind closed doors, wrapped in a silence that wasn't her own. Her eyes stared at the floor. Her voice had sunk into the stone. But Shechem? He rose early, dressed in royal linen, and walked straight to Jacob's camp with his father beside him, King Hamor, smooth-tongued and full of royal peace offerings. They came not to repent, but to negotiate. At the edge of the camp, shepherd boys dropped their tools. Leah stood frozen by the water jars, and Jacob, he stepped out from his tent like a man called into a storm he had no words for. Hamor spoke first. "My son's heart is set on your daughter," he said. "He loves her. He wishes to marry her. Name your price." Shechem added, bold, unblinking, shameless. "Whatever you ask, I'll pay. Gold, gifts, herds, cities. She is worth it." The words hung like smoke. Not apology, not regret, just entitlement dressed in silk. Jacob said nothing. Not yet, because his sons were still in the fields. And Jacob, father of a covenant, keeper of ancient promises, knew this moment was too dangerous to answer alone. But word spread like wildfire. By midday, Levi had dropped his tools. Simeon rode back red-faced. Reuben and Judah rode beside him, dust and fury trailing behind. They didn't ask questions. They didn't wait for Jacob's wisdom. They heard only the name, Dinah, and the silence that followed it. And something inside them cracked. By the time they reached camp, Shechem and Hamor were seated at Jacob's table, drinking water from clay cups, smiling, as if this were a celebration, as if buying back broken things was the same as justice. Simeon dismounted first. He didn't walk. He stormed. Reuben grabbed his arm. "Wait!" But it was too late. Simeon threw the cup from Shechem's hand. "You think you can take what isn't yours and buy your way out of it?" Levi stepped forward, eyes burning. "She was our sister, not your prize." Hamor raised both hands. "My son's intentions are honorable now. Let us join our families, make peace." But Levi's voice cut through him like a blade. "There will be peace." He smiled thinly. "But not yet." Jacob said nothing. Not in front of them. Not yet. But behind his eyes a deeper grief brewed, because he knew this wasn't just about Shechem and Dinah anymore. This was about vengeance, and the kind that dressed itself in patience always struck the hardest. That night Dinah sat alone in the stone room. Shechem paced outside, boasting to his servants, "She will be mine by law soon." But inside, she wrapped her arms tighter around herself, because deep in the dark, she could feel something shifting. Not just in her body, but in the heavens, like a sword being drawn far above her head. The next morning, the sons of Jacob stood in a line before the king and the prince. Clean robes, straight faces, calm voices, but behind their eyes, fire. Simeon spoke first. "We've thought about your offer," he said. Shechem smiled, arms folded. Hamor leaned forward, waiting. Judah added, "If you truly want our sister, not just her hand, but her honor, there's only one way." Shechem raised a brow. "Anything. You and every man in your city must become like us." Hamor frowned. "Explain." Levi stepped closer, slow and steady. "Circumcision," he said. "Every male. If you want to be joined with the people of God, you must bear the same mark." A long pause filled the tent. Then Hamor nodded slowly. "We'll consider it." "But Shechem?" He didn't hesitate. "Done." Later that day, the prince stood at the center of Shechem city. He lifted his hands and made the announcement. "All the men, young and old, must be circumcised," he declared. "It is the price of peace, the cost of unity, the future of our house." Some men protested, some obeyed. But by sundown, the order had spread like smoke through stone corridors and across public squares. Every man in the city would bear the mark, so that one man could claim what was never his. Back at the camp, the sons of Jacob returned to their tents, quiet, focused, waiting. Levi sat beside Simeon, sharpening a blade in slow, perfect strokes. "How long?" Simeon asked. 3 days, Levi replied. "Their pain will be greatest on the 3rd. Simeon nodded. Judah stood at the door, arms crossed. No one smiled. Because this wasn't justice anymore. It was something deeper, something darker. And once it began, there'd be no pulling it back. Inside Jacob's tent, the father of Israel knelt in prayer, his face buried in his cloak. He sensed something rising around him, a tide he couldn't stop. But his words came too late, because the wheels had already turned and blood was coming, not as punishment, but as revenge, and still, behind cold stone walls. Dinah waited, unaware that her name had become a blade, unaware that peace had just been traded. For war, the sun rose red, not golden, not soft, red, as if the sky already knew what the ground was about to swallow. It was the 3rd day, the day Levi had marked with his whetstone, the day every man in Shechem lay groaning in pain, helpless, weak, unable to rise. The day Simeon had whispered to his brother, "Now." They rode at dawn. No banners, no announcement. Just 2 sons of Jacob, cloaked in fury and silence, blades hidden beneath their robes. They passed the first gate. No guard stopped them. Past the market square, no voices called out, only silence, only moaning, only the sound of suffering men who had no idea they were being hunted. They found Shechem at his house. He was not in the garden now. He was inside, recovering, drowsy from pain, still confident that his deal had bought peace. He never saw them coming. Not truly. Not until the first blade glinted in the sunlight. It was over fast. Too fast for questions, too fast for mercy. Shechem died with Dinah's name on his lips. Hamor tried to intervene. He fell beside his son. And the brothers didn't stop there. Simeon and Levi walked into the city like shadows made flesh, door by door, street by street. Every man marked by the covenant fell under a sword driven by vengeance. By nightfall, the city of Shechem was no longer a city. It was a grave. Back in the valley, Jacob heard the first scream echo across the hills, then another, then silence. He stood outside his tent as dust rose on the horizon. And when he saw his sons return, blood on their robes, swords at their sides, and Dinah trailing behind them, his heart cracked. Not from grief, from fear. "You've brought ruin upon me," Jacob said. "Now every tribe in this land will come for us." But Levi didn't flinch. Simeon didn't lower his head. They only asked, "Should he treat our sister like a prostitute?" And Dinah, she stood behind them, unmoving, uncertain, because justice had come in the shape of a storm. But it didn't feel like healing. It felt like ashes. Smoke still curled from the edges of Shechem's walls. Carts were overturned. Doors hung broken. The ground ran dark where swords had spoken louder than prayer. No one sang. No one wept. There were no survivors left to grieve. Jacob stood at the edge of the ruined gate, robe torn at the hem, fists clenched at his sides. He didn't speak, not to Levi, not to Simeon, not even to God. He simply looked out over what had once been a city and now was a warning. Behind him, Dinah stepped through the ashes, not by choice. She had been retrieved like something stolen, led by her brothers in silence, no words exchanged. Not one asked if she wanted to be there. Not one asked how she felt. They brought her out like a trophy of rage. But Dinah wasn't whole. She wasn't the girl who had wandered down the hill in linen and longing. She was something else now. Not broken, but changed. Shattered into pieces too sharp to carry. Back at the camp, the atmosphere had shifted. No one laughed. No one argued. Even Reuben, the loudest of the brothers, walked softly. Leah looked at her daughter like she didn't recognize her. And Dinah didn't blame her. That night, Jacob called his sons into the tent. The air inside was heavy with dust and smoke. "You've made us stink among the people of the land," he said. "We are few. They will gather against us. We'll be destroyed." But Levi didn't apologize, and Simeon didn't retreat. Instead, they looked their father in the eye and said again, "Should he treat our sister like a prostitute?" And then they left. Jacob sat alone for a long time. He stared at the fire until it died. Then he whispered something no one heard. "God, if you are still with us, show me what to do next." Far beyond the tent, Dinah lay awake. The stars blinked above her like a sky full of unanswered questions. No one had asked her what she wanted. Not the prince, not her brothers, not even her father. She was protected, rescued, hidden, but not healed. And healing could not come through blood. It would come through something else, but not yet. Because before healing came, they would have to keep moving. The wind came first, sharp, cold, unwelcome. It swept through the camp and stirred the dust as if to say, "You cannot stay here, not after this, not after what happened in Shechem." Then came the voice. Not from a tent, not from a brother, not even from Jacob, but from heaven. "Get up, go to Bethel, dwell there, make an altar to the God who appeared to you when you fled from your brother Esau." It was not a suggestion, it was a rescue. Jacob gathered the household. He called them all, wives, sons, servants, and strangers, and this time, he spoke with authority. "Put away your idols," he commanded. "Purify yourselves. We are going to Bethel, not to hide, but to meet God again." No one argued, because deep inside, they all knew. They couldn't carry this blood through the wilderness. Something had to change. Dinah packed in silence. She folded her garments, tied her sandals, picked up the scarf she hadn't worn since the day the wind first changed. No one asked if she was ready. No one asked if she wanted to go. They just moved around her like she was a shadow following the fire. The journey began before dawn. Camels groaned. Children cried. The ground cracked under every footstep. They traveled in a long line, Jacob at the front, Levi and Simeon close behind, eyes sharp and jaws tight. And Dinah? She walked near the back, not because she had to, but because she didn't know where else to belong. The road to Bethel was dry and long, but it was more than a road. It was a path of leaving things behind, a city burned, a silence broken, a girl no longer invisible. And somewhere in the dust and distance, Dinah began to whisper prayers she hadn't known before. They were not pretty, not poetic, but they were real. God, if you still see me, if you still call me daughter, then walk beside me, even if no one else does. And though she couldn't see it yet, God was already moving ahead of her, not to erase what happened, but to redeem what remained. They called it Bethel again, the house of God. But to Dinah, it looked like nothing, just a hill scattered with thirsty stones, some barely standing, others crumbling like forgotten promises. No city, no fountains, no prince, just wind and sky, and the sound of her family trying to act normal again. Jacob was stacking stones again, hands steady, eyes full of the past. His voice cracked as he prayed, pouring oil on rock like it still meant something. Reuben fetched water. Judah guarded the camels. Leah sat apart, her hands shaking in her lap, eyes glassy with what ifs and what now. And Dinah, she wandered behind the altar, out of sight, beneath the fig tree no one noticed. The ground was warm beneath her. The leaves flickered like they remembered Eden. And finally, she let her knees fall into the dust. I'm still here, she whispered. Not to anyone near her, not to her father, not to her brothers, to God. I thought the story ended back there, in the stone house, in the silence, in the garden with no doors. Her voice trembled, but she kept speaking. They saved me, but they never asked if I survived. Above her, the fig leaves danced, and suddenly, the wind shifted. Not loud, not fire, just breathe. Something brushed her shoulder. She looked up. No one was there, but something holy was. She didn't hear words, but she felt them. I was there. I saw you. You are not what was taken. You are what remains. Tears came. Not fast, not loud, just one at a time, like the ground was drawing sorrow from her bones. And as they fell, something else rose in her. Not anger, not shame, but a voice. The one she thought she lost, the one no one had asked for. Back at the altar, Jacob called the place El Bethel, the God of the house of God. But beneath the fig tree, Dinah built her own altar, made of brokenness, stacked with silence, lit by a God who had seen everything and still chose to come near. And for the first time since Shechem, Dinah stood, not because she had healed, but because she had hope. The sun was slipping low over Bethel when Dinah returned to the camp. No one noticed at first. She moved quietly through the scattered tents, past Reuben's herd, around Levi's watchful eyes. She was used to being invisible. She had become good at it. But something was different now, not in her face, not in her dress, in her silence. It no longer weighed her down. It walked beside her as a witness. Leah was mending a blanket by the fire. Her hands paused when she saw her daughter, but she didn't speak, not out of cruelty, just fear. Fear that if she asked anything, Dinah might shatter again. So she simply opened her lap and held out the blanket. Dinah sat down beside her, said nothing, and mended the corner that was torn. Together. Later that night, Jacob gathered the family around the altar. The fire flickered against the stones, casting shadows across 12 sons, 4 mothers, and 1 daughter no one quite knew what to do with. Jacob lifted his hands to pray, but before he could speak, Dinah stood. The wind paused. Even the flames stilled, like they were listening. "I need to say something," she said. Her voice was low, but it rang through the camp like a song that had been waiting to be sung. "I'm not what happened to me." No one moved. Not Simeon. Not Levi. Not Leah. "I'm not just your sister," she said to the brothers, who had drawn blood. "I'm not just your daughter," she said to the father who had let her silence linger. "I'm not your shame. I'm not your secret." She swallowed, and for the first time said the words she hadn't dared speak aloud. "I'm still here." Jacob lowered his arms. Leah's hand trembled over her mouth, and one by one, heads dropped, not out of judgment but out of something deeper. Recognition. Because Dinah hadn't just survived, she had returned. She walked away from the fire, not with fanfare, not with applause, just with the quiet dignity of someone who had learned to carry both pain and purpose. And this time, no one let her disappear. The camp moved again, slowly, carefully, packing stones and stories and a silence that had been reshaped by fire. They didn't talk about Shechem anymore, not out loud, but it lived in the space between glances, in the way Judah kept his hand on his sword, in the way Leah prayed over her daughter at night and whispered blessings meant to unbreak what had been broken. But Dinah was not the same girl they had once guarded. She rose before sunrise now, collected water before anyone asked, sat near the fire with the younger girls and taught them how to braid cord and tell stories with their hands, stories that didn't begin with pain, stories that didn't end in fear. She didn't need to be louder, she didn't try to lead, but every step she took was a quiet rebellion against the idea that her story had ended in a stranger's house. One morning, Jacob approached her. Just him. No sons, no servants, just a father, weathered by sorrow, holding something in his hands, a small piece of cloth, torn, stained, the one she had worn when she was taken. He held it out, not as a reminder, but as an offering. "I should have come sooner," Jacob said. Dinah looked at him. "I was afraid," he added, "not just of what happened, but of what it meant to be your father and say nothing." She didn't take the cloth. Instead, she took his hand. And for a long time, they said nothing. Because sometimes restoration isn't made with words. It's made with willingness. That day, Dinah began carving a small stone by the river. She didn't ask for help. She didn't tell anyone why. She carved it slow, soft edges, no names, just a symbol. A line that bent and opened like a door. A symbol that meant, "I'm still walking." She placed it beneath a tree just outside the camp, not to be worshipped, not to be mourned, but to remind herself that while she didn't choose the pain, she could choose the path. No one gave Dinah a title, but her presence changed things. She didn't ask for it, didn't demand it. But the camp had shifted around her, like a river that had learned to bend around a stone with respect. The younger women watched how she listened, how she walked without shrinking, how she gathered herbs in the early morning and left them at Leah's tent without needing to be thanked. The servants whispered her name like a thread of calm in the chaos. Even her brothers, those wild, fire-eyed men who once split cities in rage, had begun to look at her with something new. Not guilt, not pity, honor. It wasn't that everything was fixed. There were still shadows, Still quiet moments that made her chest feel too small. But she didn't run from them anymore. She welcomed the ache. It reminded her she had survived. And more than that, she had chosen what to do after. One evening, as the camp rested beneath purple skies and scattered stars, Reuben approached her. Awkward, careful, honest. "I saw the stone you carved," he said. "The one near the tree." She nodded. "It's not a grave." "I know." A pause. Then he asked, voice trembling, "Do you still believe God has something for you? Even after all this?" She looked at him. Not with anger, not with softness, just clarity. "Especially after all this." That night, Dinah sat near the fire, and the girls gathered around her, not because they were told to, because they wanted to. She told them stories, not the one that hurt, but the ones that healed. She spoke of Rachel's laughter, of Leah's prayers, of the God who had watched her beneath a fig tree when no one else did. And the girls listened wide-eyed, clutching their knees, their futures resting in her voice. For the first time in a long time, Dinah wasn't the silence in someone else's story. She was the storyteller. And the wilderness didn't feel like exile anymore. It felt like a beginning. Time passed. Not quickly, not loudly. Just enough for the dust to settle around the memories, just enough for the pain to soften into something Dinah could carry. Not like a chain, but like a stone smoothed by water. The camp grew. Children ran between tents. Stories traveled with the smoke of the fire. And Dinah walked among them, no longer ghost, no longer warning, but woman, wise, rooted, unshakable. There were still nights when the wind shifted and her mind wandered back to Shechem, to the garden behind the gate, to the moment the story cracked, but those memories no longer owned her. They had been folded into the fabric of her life, not erased, not worshipped, but woven into something greater. She became a guide to the younger girls, a quiet counselor to her brothers' wives. When someone gave birth, they asked for Dinah. When someone wept, they found her first. She never called herself a leader. But in a camp full of voices, hers was the one others leaned toward, because she didn't speak from theory. She spoke from ashes and turned them into wisdom. One evening, many years later, Dinah sat by a slow-burning fire with Leah, both older now, both quiet. Leah ran her fingers along the hem of a worn shawl. "She was so small when I first held her," she said. "I prayed she would grow strong. I didn't know how strong she would need to be." Dinah smiled faintly. "Your prayers still worked?" she said. Leah's eyes brimmed. "I failed you sometimes." Dinah took her mother's hand. "And yet, here I am." Nearby, Jacob told stories to his grandchildren. Judah carved something in wood. Joseph stood beside him, dreaming bigger than tents. And in the middle of it all, between laughter and legacy, Dinah watched, not from the edge, not behind the veil, but present. She had not married, not again, not yet. But her story had never been about what was taken. It was about what remained, what God restored. The next morning, before sunrise, Dinah returned to the fig tree. The same kind of tree she had sat beneath in Bethel, only now this one was hers. Beneath it, she buried a new stone, smooth, white, etched with her own hand, just one word, seen. Because she had been, by God, through grief, through silence, through fury and fire. He had seen her. And in the story of Israel, the 12 tribes, the kings, the prophets, there would always be the quiet strength of one girl who survived, who healed, who walked on. Her name was Dinah. Not forgotten, not erased, a daughter of the covenant, a voice remembered in heaven, and her story, though scarred, was never wasted.